Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in speaks on the phone for the first time with the presumptive U.S. President-elect Joe Biden, the two reaffirming their country's alliance and pledging to work together closely. President Moon is set to take part in a summit this evening with the leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, where he'll introduce an enhanced version of his new Southern policy. And starting this Friday, there will be fines in South Korea of about $90 for people not wearing masks in places where they're required. We've got the details on where and when you need to put one on. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. President Moon Jae-in has spoken on the phone for the first time with the presumptive U.S. President-elect Joe Biden. The Blue House says they discussed Korean Peninsula issues and reaffirmed their commitment to the South Korea-U.S. alliance. Kim Min-ji reports.
President Moon Jae-in and the presumptive U.S. President-elect Joe Biden have reaffirmed their commitment to a robust alliance and a peaceful and prosperous Korean Peninsula. They had their first phone call on Thursday morning Korea time, lasting 14 minutes. It came 4 days after Biden was projected to have won the election.
President Moon said that he hopes to closely communicate with the U.S. for the development of the Seoul-Washington alliance and for denuclearization and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula.
In a statement from his transition team, Biden said he wants to strengthen the alliance as a linchpin of security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. He also stressed that he looks forward to working closely with Moon in solving the North Korea nuclear issue. Biden expressed hope that the two countries can also cooperate on global issues such as tackling COVID-19, responding to climate change, and reviving the global economy. Moon and Biden also agreed to meet at an early date once the president-elect takes office. Meanwhile, the National Security Council convened Thursday to review the latest developments regarding the U.S. presidential election. The members discussed ways to further develop the Seoul-Washington alliance, as well as measures to achieve lasting peace and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. With official dialogue between Moon and Biden having started, South Korea is expected to step up communication with the incoming U.S. administration on various fronts, especially diplomacy, as it seeks to get inter-Korean affairs back on track. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
This evening, President Moon Jae-in is going to take part in a virtual summit between South Korea and ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Moon and the leaders of the 10 member states will evaluate their contributions to the partnership so far and discuss ways to work together going forward. President Moon will unveil his new Southern Policy Plus, an upgraded strategy aimed at strengthening ties, cooperation, and exchanges based on 3 pillars: people, prosperity, and peace. The Blue House says it expects the summit to build unity and coordination with the international community in tackling the pandemic. A South Korean think tank is predicting that even by the end of next year, the global economy is unlikely to have fully recovered to the level it was at the end of 2019. A report Thursday from the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy forecasts the global economy to grow 5% next year after shrinking 5.1% this year. But it warned that in the worst case, next year's growth rate could be as low as 2.2% if a resurgence of COVID-19 undermines the positive effects of economic stimulus policies. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs says South Korea's GDP will grow 3.6% next year, and the Kospi by the end of next year will rise from its current level of about 2,400 to around 2,800. In its forecast Thursday, Goldman said South Korea will recover quickly thanks to an improving COVID-19 situation and eased trade tensions. The South Korean government has announced a comprehensive plan to help small and medium-sized businesses play a greater role in the growth of the local economy. The plan, announced Thursday in a meeting of economy-related ministers led by Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun, would provide SMEs with $1.3 billion in funds for R&D to help them develop new products and gain footholds in new markets. And by next year, funds for facility investment would rise to $1 billion. The goal is to boost what the government calls their contribution to the economy, that is, their share of total sales, exports, and job creation from the current 20% up to 30% by 2030. By 2024, the plan would have 1,000 SMEs producing what it called world-class products and another 12,000 taking part in sectors related to the government's digital and Green New Deal projects. For a fifth day in a row, COVID-19 cases in South Korea have been in the triple digits, so there could be stricter social distancing in the coming days. And as previously announced, from this Friday, people not wearing masks in public places can be fined 100,000 won, or about $90 US. Jaein has the details.
People in South Korea will face much stricter mandatory mask-wearing regulations from Friday. The South Korean government will impose fines on people who do not wear them in public as officials look to prevent the further spread of COVID-19. People are mandated to wear face masks at 23 multi-use facilities, on public transportation, and hospitals, as well as indoor sports stadiums, and any gatherings of more than 500 people. People are required to wear KIEP 94 and KIEP 80 face masks, or fabric masks that can cover their mouth and nose, but it's not acceptable to cover one's face with just a scarf. Violators will be faced a fine of up to $90 US. However, there are some circumstances where there are exceptions. When eating or drinking at coffee shops and restaurants, people don't need to wear masks. People smoking outside are also excluded. However, people who use public bathhouses or swimming pools are required to wear masks when they're not in the water. For events like weddings, attendees are required to wear masks all times, but brides, grooms, and their parents are excluded. If people are able to keep 2 meters apart during outdoor activities such as hiking and biking, they don't need to wear masks either. Health authorities are urging people to wear face masks properly, as those who don't cover their mouth and nose could also be fined. 최원정, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the global market news, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good afternoon. Thank you for coming on.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, stocks in New York bounced back overnight for the most part, thanks to a rebound in tech shares. The Dow was slightly lower, but the Nasdaq was up more than 2%. What's the story in the global markets?
Over the last 2 weeks, there was a huge stock market rise in U.S. due to Mr. Biden's victory in presidential election and news on coronavirus vaccine development by Pfizer. As U.S. economy is expected to return to normal status, pro-cyclical stocks had a big gains like GM, Boeing, ExxonMobil, and so on. On the other hand, tech corporation stocks, which has been benefited from online business increase like Amazon, Netflix, Google, and so on, had a big drops.
Well, Korean stocks had risen for 8 sessions in a row as well, but today mostly down. The Kospi by about 0.4%, and the KOSDAQ basically flat. What's happening in the domestic market?
Domestic markets responds to vaccine development and Mr. Biden's victory in a similar way of United States market. Traditional pro-cyclical stocks in Korea, like banks, security corporations, construction machineries, are rising from last week. But representative high-tech corporations like Naver and Kakao are decreasing over 1% per day in 2 straight trading days. But in today's market, the market is pretty much volatile due to more understanding on vaccines deployment to the people. Kospi dropped by 0.4% today, and KOSDAQ marginally gained with 0%.
Well, now, zooming out, assuming Joe Biden is the next U.S. president, it's widely expected that this would boost global trade, moving away from Trump's more protectionist policies, and this would benefit Korea, too. What do you say, Professor?
When President Trump became president of the United States in 2017, he left all multilateral FTAs like NAFTA and TPP. This protective trade policy of the United States under President Trump has decreased international trade in a large scale, like more than 10%. And the largest victim of this trade decrease would be South Korean economy, because Korea is one of the most foreign-dependent countries in the world. But since President-elected Biden declared that he will recover previous multilateral FTAs as soon as he enters Oval Office, the size of international trade will be recovered, which could be a positive sign on recovering Korean economy and export.
So trade could be recovering, but the pandemic and tensions with China will remain a factor even under a Biden administration. Looking at what the Democrats have pledged to do, what stands out to you as a risk for Korea, and what can Korea do about it?
President-elected Biden has made it clear that the higher priority of U.S. government goes to controlling COVID-19 rather than recovering economy. So he can take tougher measures, shutdowns and lockdowns to fight the COVID pandemic in U.S. rather than focusing on economic recovery after he has sworn in next January. So this could hamper overall growth of U.S. economy, which will have a ripple effects for Korean export.
Well, speaking of exports, last month, Korea's export prices were down more than 2% from the month before. In fact, every month for almost a year and a half now, exports prices have been lower than they were a year before. Tell us about that, Professor.
The major factor behind quickly decreasing export price is stronger won's value or declining $1 exchange rate. If we take a look at foreign exchange market situation, we have a lot of reasons to increase Korean won's value. From October, foreign investors purchases stock very aggressively in domestic market, and Korean economy's current account surplus is increasing. Like in October, the current account surplus exceeded $10 billion. So these all make Korean won very strong than before. Also, it is expected that Mr. Biden will let U.S. dollars weaker for promoting U.S. export and economic recovery. This is another strong factor for stronger won or declining a $1 exchange rate.
All right, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you very much.
The South Korea's ruling Democratic Party, the government, and the presidential office have agreed to come up with measures to help the country's so-called essential workers who've had an excessive workload in the pandemic, mainly in delivery services and at medical centers. The government's going to work on a system to collect data on their incomes so they can ensure all workers in the country have employment insurance. Lawmakers aim to secure a budget for the programs of about $1.6 billion for next year and to revise the tax law. Finance Minister Hong Nam-ki called for systematic measures to prevent deaths from overwork, as in recent cases seen in the logistics industry. The government said it'll unveil the specifics by December. The South Korean government has decided to keep offering a special tax deduction to landlords who give discounts on rent to small business owners until next June. Some landlords in the country have lowered rents to help their small business tenants in the pandemic. Then they're eligible to deduct 50% of the discount they give from their personal or business income taxes. This benefit had already been extended once until the end of this year. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.